Women are not as obsessed with control and power and domination as men are.
Women generally don't commit crimes this heinous. You know, this is usually the domain of men.
That's unfortunate. Oh, yeah, equal opportunity, definitely.
He said, "Oh, I don't want to die. Please, I don't want to die."
That's okay. Boom.
Throughout the night, you could hear him calling out in his room. He was yelling that I love you and I'm sorry.
To expect certain stereotypic behaviors in women. They're congenial, they play nicely, they know how to be cooperative, and they certainly aren't violent.
People are used to thinking of men as the part of the species that's aggressive and kills people or does something violent. When people think of women who've killed someone, it's alarming to them. It sort of violates the norm of sugar and spice and all things nice. That's what girls are made of, right? We would prefer to believe that women are not violent. But it's not true. From a scientific perspective, most studies on psychopathy have been conducted in male prisoners. So the data are skewed. Right now, we tend to think of women being a small percentage of psychopathic killers. But I do think there's a greater number than we imagine. I think that as a group, female psychopaths, they're both overlooked and they're underestimated.
Over the years, popular culture has assigned labels to particularly heinous crimes that have been committed by females that have been thought to be psychopaths. We're going to examine some of the unique characteristics of female psychopathy and explore the horrific crimes that they've committed.
So normally if you use the term vigilante, people will think of a man, maybe even a cowboy film from the West. People will generally think of it as a man who's a vigilante trying to seek justice, Zorro. They don't think right away a woman. And that's why the female psychopath who is a vigilante flies under our radar.
Vigilante is both judge and jury, and they decide who lives and who dies. And while we see male psychopaths that have that vigilante justice streak in their crimes, we do see that more often with female psychopathic offenders. One of the more notorious or well-known vigilante psychopaths is Aileen Wuornos.
By her own admission, Wuornos was a hitchhiking highway who killed 7 motorists in 1 year.
I still say to myself, I still say that it was a self-defense.
It's shocking because women who use extreme violence are rare. And so, as human beings, we are always attracted to or respond to things which are rarer. We idealize womanhood in very stereotypical and unrealistic ways, which then leads to the flip, where we then sensationalize their violence. So men's violence is normalized, and women's violence is sensationalized.
When Wuornos is initially caught, she claims that she killed these men because she was sexually assaulted by them, she was physically beaten by them. But the evidence just doesn't support that. What we know is some of the victims were actually shot in the back. To make matters worse, Wuornos stole their cars, she stole their wallets, and robbery was a secondary gain.
Aileen is a woman who has an upbringing that is not trauma-free. She has a history of abuse and decides that it would be fine to rid the world of men who then solicit sex workers. So she's able to seduce men with the promise of having sex with them and then killing them. It's her way of cleaning up the world. From a psychoanalytic perspective, she's paying the world back for whatever abuse she suffered. There's also a sense of gratification. They're fulfilling a fantasy of something that they want. We see similar justification in another female psychopath, Angela Simpson.
Wow, I killed Terry.
And how and why?
I killed Terry by deceptively luring him to apartment 201, sitting him down and beating him with various objects until he was unconscious, and then I slit his throat.
I told him upstairs, when I do give you some, I do because that's what he kept asking me to do. Would you please? Oh, yeah.
Is that what he thought he was going to get?
That's exactly. That's why I deceptively lured him up there.
The use of sex or promises of sexual favors and sexual interactions or flirting is a strategy that female offenders do use more so than male psychopathic offenders. In the case of both Warnos and Simpson, we see that they were able to use this tool of promises of sex and sexual favors to lure their victims in. Ultimately, in the process, these women found a way to access them when their guards were down, and they were in essentially their most vulnerable state.
Why? Why? Because Terry told me that he was an informant. He said that he met with the DA periodically, still, regarding cases that are, I don't know, 10 to 16 years old, crazy. Proceeded to beat him to death.
With the tire iron?
Tire iron, a stick, a hammer. Yes, I did have my hammer.
There's no evidence that the victim was ever an informant. Simpson's outlook is that she is superior to most people in that she gets to decide who's a snitch. She gets to decide if they live or die.
Simpson is describing her act of killing men. It's so matter-of-fact while she's eating, just mentioning that she has stabbed, tortured him, as if it's the same thing as asking for potato chips or a Diet Coke. There's nothing shocking about it. And this is one of the traits that we do talk about in psychopathy, that people have low empathy and that they seem callous and indifferent to other human life. And this is a feature that we don't automatically associate with women.
I was very high just on the act alone, dude.
Men are usually thought of as being stronger, bigger, and more dominating of women. And in this situation, she's flipped the power dynamic. It's the male who is helpless and who is bound, and she is fully in control of everything that will happen to him, including his death.
We've all heard the phrase that hell hath no fury like a woman that's scorned. Generally, female psychopaths tend to be less physically violent and more interpersonally aggressive and manipulative than male psychopaths. However, when women psychopaths are betrayed or rejected, sometimes they do become violent, as we'll see in the case with Jodi Arias.
To ask you this. Did you kill Travis Alexander?
Absolutely not. No, I had no part in it.
But a police report shows forensic evidence tying Arias to the murder. Alexander was stabbed 27 times, shot once, and his throat was cut open.
Jodi Arias, upon hearing that her ex-boyfriend was going to be going away with another woman, became triggered because it was the ultimate rejection for her. Basically, it said, he's moved on, and now she no longer has control over him.
While rejection is difficult for people to accept, the majority of us are able to process it, move on from it. But in the case of a female psychopath who is violent, their ability to handle rejection and their ability to regulate their emotions of anger and loss and grief really are significantly lacking.
Was he alive when he was stabbed in the heart?
Yes.
Was he alive, in your opinion, when his throat was slit?
Yes.
Normally, when we hear that term about scorn, we always think of a romantic relationship where people have been attached and then the relationship's fallen apart. But it can be more broad than that. A person doesn't have to be in a romantic relationship to feel vengeance is necessary and needed. And a nice example of that is actually in the Psychopath case.
Did he get?
Should he be?
Yes.
If he was dead, why would he be dead? From what?
Killing him. I was getting dressed because you can't go like that because it looks like you're ghetto in this. Made me mad.
And then what happened?
Went and shot him. He said,
Oh, I don't want to die. Please, I don't want to die.
That's okay. Boom.
Sidibaka is in her early 60s, and she's had a history of a stroke. She's living with her daughter and her son-in-law, and when he speaks in a disparaging way about an outfit that she's wearing, her clothing, and she interprets it as a put-down of who she is as a person. It's sort of an insult that cuts right to the core, that is disrespectful. We might say in psychiatry that this is a narcissistic injury, and with a psychopath, that's particularly dangerous.
How many rounds do you remember firing?
15.
Did he say anything to you?
Grandma, I love you.
After you shot him, then what did you do?
Went to Denny's.
The complete lack of remorse that she's showing is somewhat stunning, particularly given her age as a female. When you look at Cynthia Sidibaka, you think of somebody's grandmother. You think of a kind, gentle person who wants to nurture her family, who has a softness about her, and there's nothing soft or gentle about Cynthia Sidibaka. She is a female psychopathic offender who just killed her son-in-law.
He's dead, isn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Good. I shot him. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, thank you. Thank you to take me whenever. Oh, God. Oh, God.
In our culture and society, oftentimes elderly women are invisible. They're not seen as authority figures. They're also not seen as sexual creatures or as attractive individuals any longer. Female psychopathic offenders oftentimes are aware about how society perceives them, as well as the stereotypical expectations of how a female will behave. And that isn't any more true than Dorothea Puente.
Police have finally caught up with Dorothea Puente. She is the woman who is suspected of killing 7 people and burying them in the yard of her boarding house in Sacramento for their Social Security checks.
I have not killed anyone. I told you that. I have not killed anyone. The checks I cashed, yes.
Puente flew under the radar and wasn't detected for quite some time because, first of all, she disguised herself. Puente was only in her 50s, but she let herself look different and older than she really was. And she was also somebody who ran this boarding home. People looked at her as a caregiver. So nobody was suspecting what she was doing, that she was in fact a serial killer. Another individual who used her identity and her occupation as a caregiver to avoid detection was Elizabeth Wetlofter.
I knew the difference between right and wrong, but I thought this was something that God or whoever wanted me to do. They could be a bit of a handful. He would grab the nurses across the aesthetics. But he did touch me inappropriately once.
Run me through.
How about 9:30? I gave him a dose of 50 milligrams of insulin. Non-diabetic. So throughout the night he was yelling out, "I love you," and "I'm sorry." And then at 3:30, the doctor came in and said that his cause of death was from an embolism due to his closed hips. And afterwards, I did feel a release, like a release of pressure.
We go to the hospital, we think the people who are there, or to a nursing home, they're there to help us. They don't abuse people, they certainly don't kill them. And then her type of psychopathy is centered around this notion. We can think of the angel of mercy type of serial killer. What she'll say to other people is, they shouldn't live that long, or I'm helping them along. Although when we look at her statements more closely, we end up finding that there's more than meets the eye.
What's different about the way female psychopaths engage in violent behavior versus male psychopaths is that when they are violent, sometimes it's a little more discreet, whereas we might expect a male to stab someone or shoot someone. In this case, it's much more subtle, and it also makes it more difficult to detect.
So in the case of Ms. Wetlaufer, she is in a system that also facilitates her access to people and her access to drugs. And we do know that women who kill may be more likely to use poisons or medications. For many female psychopaths who kill, they'll choose a poison or choose something that's not violent. And so for a psychopath who's working in a healthcare system, it fits in a very hand-in-glove sort of way that there are drugs available that are normal, but in certain doses are lethal. So they're not obvious poisons. They have access to them. They can administer them to people. And it makes the deaths usually go unnoticed. They're attributed to either death of natural causes or something else. And this does fit with what we know, at least in part, about female psychopaths. If they choose to kill, it tends to be a less violent method.
She just got harder and harder to look after, and one night when I had to look after her, I started getting the feeling about a surge again. So, yeah, I overdosed her.
When you work in a nursing facility, you're expecting patients to have some behavioral and/or emotional difficulty. She's accepted a role as a nurse, as a caregiver to people who need help, and she's ultimately using that to kill people. She's a great example of a female psychopath. She's using her knowledge and her role as a caregiver to kill someone in a way that's very discreet and could have flown under the radar for who knows how many more victims had she not come forward.
I decided I didn't want to nurse anymore. I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore.
While Wetlaufer was the caregiver to all of her victims, it's important to note that she didn't kill them on day one. She facilitated a relationship with them, she bonded with them, and ultimately poisoned them.
Another distinction between male and female psychopaths is their motive. Male psychopaths may have a motive such as sexual gratification or pleasure, for example, like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy. But female psychopaths tend to have a motive toward greed and financial security and stability. The label Black Widow has been assigned to females who kill significant others or spouses to gain some sort of financial means or security. And a great example of that is Jill Coit.
This Southern belle, once a former model and beauty queen, has been married 10 times, and no less than 2 of her husbands have died in mysterious circumstances.
There was always a different person, a different man.
Her youngest son, William, doesn't remember much about his father, Clark. He was just 3 years old in 1972 when his dad was found murdered. Jill Coit was the cops' #1 suspect.
I have never murdered anyone, and I definitely did not murder Mr. Coit.
To this day, the case remains unsolved. Jill received almost $200,000 in stocks and bonds from her husband's estate.
Jill Coit is an individual who married multiple times. She married men and lured them out of money, out of their life savings, out of their homes. She got them to take care of her children while she moved on to her next victim. She made up fantastic stories to gain their sympathy.
I don't smoke or drink. I guess my greatest sin is that I get married.
Ultimately, Jill Coit ends up marrying a gentleman named Jerry Boggs. When Jerry figured out that Jill was a liar, his mission was to make sure that everybody knew that Jill Coit was a fraud. Ultimately, he sued her for fraud. 6 days before that trial was set to begin, Jill convinced her new boyfriend to dress in a disguise, women's clothing, a wig, and to enter the home and shoot and kill Jerry Boggs.
So we know that male psychopaths tend to target random victims, people they don't necessarily know. But in contrast, female psychopaths tend to target individuals they know. They develop close relationships sometimes with the very people that they're going to take advantage of. And some female psychopaths will use behavior like flirtation and sex in order to manipulate and entrap their victims. And a great example of that is Dalia DiPolito.
Listen, we had a report of a disturbance at your house, and there were shots fired. Is your husband Michael? Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, ma'am, he's been killed. Sure you want to kill him, dude?
I'm a lot tougher than what I love.
How long have you guys been married?
Not even a year.
It's tragic. Is there anybody you can think of that would want to do this to him?
My husband's on probation for stock fraud.
Stock fraud? Was he spending time in prison?
It was for taking money. So it was a lot of money. It was $100,000 that he had to pay back. People weren't happy that he was getting on probation.
What's interesting about DiPolito's case is that she actually was working as an escort when she met her husband, and it's a transactional relationship that's mutually agreed upon.
DiPolito worked in commercial sex, which means she's repeatedly been, in some ways, dehumanized, probably exposed to violence, and probably does not think highly of men, nor see them as anything else but objects that purchase her and ill-treat her. Dalia DiPolito learned about her husband's property and life insurance before she married him. And so this is sort of a long-term plan where she seduces him, she marries him, and then she puts a hit on him to inherit property and life insurance. So it wasn't impulsive. She planned it coldly.
That's how I'm gonna do it. The robbery went bad. Now, once that's done, you know, I'll wait a few days. I'm not gonna call you right away because the police gonna be all over the Understand?
I'm a lot tougher than what I look. I know you think you're like, oh, what a cute little girl, whatever. You know, but I'm not.
When DiPolito tells the undercover officer, who she thinks is a hitman, that she's tougher than she looks, and she knows that he sees her as a cute little girl, what she's actually giving us is a little bit of insight and awareness into what she knows about how to manipulate others. While DiPolito believes she's gonna walk out of this as a single rich lady, she's about to find out that her reality is absolutely not coming true.
Come here, please. Come here. Mike, come here.
Can't
Why not? I didn't do anything
I
to
heard you.
Mike, come here, please.
So despite being obviously caught, you don't see the remorse that you would expect to see. She's actually trying to regain control of the situation and manipulate her husband again, and she's almost playing the victim.
Oftentimes, society doesn't find it hard to see women as fragile and frail, the damsel in distress, that victim that needs rescuing. But when you have a female psychopath who knows that about society and uses that to their advantage, what you might actually have is not a damsel in distress, but a stone-cold killer, like the case of Pamela Smart.
We had sex.
By that you mean intercourse?
Yeah, we made love.
In court today, Smart admitted to having a steamy affair with a teenage student, but eventually tried to break it off. Defendant says the student, William Flynn, was so distraught at the prospect of not seeing her that he threatened to kill himself, but ended up killing her husband.
Do you want this jury to understand that Bill Flynn decided to kill your husband because you broke up with him?
I don't know why Bill Flynn killed Greg. I can just come in here and give my testimony.
So even as you sit here today, you still have no idea why he may have done this. Is that it?
I didn't say I had no idea, but I don't know specifically.
Well, I'm asking you, what do you think? Why do you think he did this?
Probably because he thought we could be together.
There are several characteristics of psychopathy that we can see in this scenario with Pamela Smart. First of all, she is failing to accept any responsibility for this. Second of all, there is no remorse. There's no indication that she feels bad that her husband was killed in the first place. It's rather cold and callous in the way she talks about it. There is no emotion behind it. It's really, if anything, she feels indignant and seemingly upset with the student for sending her to prison.
The damsel in distress ruse that female psychopaths can use can be very effective. An example in the case of Jennifer Pan, who used the ruse quite effectively initially, but it didn't work in the end.
Help me, please. I need help. I don't know my parents are. Some people broke into our house. Okay, you heard gunshots? They had guns, and they were holding me at gunpoint. Please? Dad?
I, upstairs in my room, called it a night with the TV on. I believe that was around 9:30 or so. Suddenly, I could hear the voices. And a guy was there, and he came at me and had string in his hands and tied my arms back and said, I have a gun behind your back. Do what I say. If you do what I say, then no one will get hurt. Where is the money? Show me where your money is. And then I heard 2 pops. My mom screamed. I yelled out for her. And at that point, I had my phone on me, behind me, that I had hidden there that they didn't know about. I whipped up the phone and I called 911. But I still hadn't heard anything from my mom, and all I could hear was my dad running on the street, moaning and making sounds.
She keeps holding her hand over her heart. She speaks in a soft voice, is trying to cry at times. She looks vulnerable. We do have that instinct as humans to try and help another human in distress. And so it's effective as a ruse because it lets the psychopath go undetected if we think we're helping the victim and we don't realize we're actually helping the murderer. But it doesn't take long for the detectives to figure out that something doesn't quite add up.
Stand up and turn around. Put this in the side that you believe it was in. Put your hands behind your back, exactly how you remember they were.
They tied my upper arm around the banister, but my hands were bound together.
So now how can you get to the phone, and how do you make the phone call?
You made me, now I feel like I've said something wrong.
We find out that for the last 4 or 5 years, she has been leading a double life, one which she has constructed intricately The parents believe that she's going to pharmacy school, she's gaining a degree, that things are going beautifully. And then in the real life, she's really not doing anything. And we discover that her parents strongly disapproved of her boyfriend, who has a criminal record and is a drug dealer.
You admittedly lied. You've lied to your parents about going to school. Who's to say this whole thing isn't a lie? Because if you are lying, it's the most cold-blooded thing that I've ever faced in my life.
I think the parents were probably going to cut her off and not give her any money. And then we see the reactive rage to that. So an additional element of psychopathy is the parasitic lifestyle, we call it, meaning that they will live off of other people. And in Pan's case, she wants her parents' money. She's been enjoying living off their money. She has been a parasite. She's lying to them to get all the benefits of living with them, as long as she can get everything else that she wants.
Pan says he saw his daughter Jennifer untied, whispering back and forth with one of the intruders, and he described that conversation as soft and friendly. He says he could hear his wife begging for their daughter's safety. "Don't hurt her," she cried, and then the trigger was pulled.
She worked with her boyfriend to set up a murder, and he had hired men to come into the house and kill her parents. She could no longer keep up the lies, so that her entire world was going to collapse.
To want to hear your parents get killed, or to see it, rather than asking someone to come in and kill her parents while she's away, it means she's much more callous and cold-hearted. We say that of lacking empathy in psychopathy.
When we think about parent and child relationships, in the case of Jennifer Pan, parents don't think that their children would ever harm them. As they get older, they put trust in their children to take care of them, to care for them, and to remain watchful. We also think of parent-child relationships in the reverse, that parents are charged with keeping their children safe, except in the cases of female psychopathic killers, what we think of in popular culture as mommy dearest. And that couldn't be more obvious than in the case of Susan Smith.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home.
In 1994, Susan Smith got on national television and pleaded with the person who supposedly had carjacked her with her 2 young children sleeping in the back. But what we now know, tragically, is that while she was on national television pleading for the return of her children, Susan Smith the whole time knew that her children were dead at the bottom of a lake.
She wanted to be in a new romantic relationship, and the man she was interested in was not interested in dating a woman with young children. Susan Smith strapped her children into their car seats and let the car essentially roll into a body of water where they slowly drowned.
For a woman to turn around and kill her kids is not right. There's no way to explain it. You can't even understand it.
It's shocking because, in fact, women who use extreme violence are quite rare. We are primed as a culture to be more in shock when women are violent, where we normalize men's violence. If someone has psychopathic traits and they become a mother, it might change things for a little while. And the part that's narcissistic, she might be excited at the idea of creation or birth. But once the reality comes in, the deep personal sacrifices, the loss of time, where you put your money, the perhaps absence of attention from potential partners, it immediately and quickly becomes less exciting.
To be a successful, effective parent, your children's needs oftentimes come before your own. And in the case of Elaine Campione, that was something that smacked her in the face when she and her husband separated, and he filed for full custody of both of their daughters.
And you know, everything is God, I hate you. I truly, truly hate you. It's the usual routine that we always take.
So what happens when she's finished her bath?
She gets out of the tub and I dried her off. She was really, really tired.
Mm-hmm.
So I just got her in her pajamas and put her into bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went up to the living room and was cleaning up.
In court. So, in her mind, Elaine Campione only has one choice.
I was getting really tired. I curled up with Sophia. She was cold.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they turn and cuddle in with me. They weren't cuddling in with me.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia had weird colored lips.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at Serena, and she was looking weird too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I thought there was something wrong.
What she's essentially describing are the postmortem effects of her having drowned them to death. And after Elaine Campione drowns each of her daughters and then dresses them up in cute little princess dresses, curls their hair, and puts them to bed, dead. And while it may seem like Elaine Campione is having a psychotic episode and she's out of touch with reality, what we know from the rest of the case file is this was just another example of Campione's attempts to manipulate investigators.
At any point, did you push her under the water?
No. These are my babies. I've been trying to teach them not to be scared of the water.
Did you kill both of them?
I cannot speak without an attorney present.
So her performance appears theatrical. It appears as if she's saying what she thinks will help her manipulate the situation. She's acting the way she thinks might be helpful for her, pretending as if she has no idea what's going on. She actually very clearly does just a few minutes later whenever she asks for a lawyer.
Hey, Serena, who loves you?
Mommy.
Who loves you the most? That much? Oh, I think I love you more than that.
She created this video of her girls just before she murdered them. She's presenting herself as this very loving mother. It's almost like she wanted to create this to further hurt her ex-husband, to show him, look at your beautiful girls, look how much we loved each other, and then she murdered them. So it's another way for her to exact callous vengeance against him for seeking custody.
Recording this because Leo and there are you happy? Everything is gone, gone. I hate you. I truly, truly hate you. You didn't care about our babies. You didn't care about me. You care about yourself. All you did was hurt us. You were an evil, horrible man. And I'm just going to God, because God is the only one who cares and who can protect me. Because you are the devil, Leo. You are the psychotic devil. At least the girls and I will be together in heaven, protected and safe from you.
She ended up taking a handful of pills, and by all accounts, it appears she did not expect to wake up. And this was really her last memorialization of what kind of mom she was and what she wanted to be the narrative. And consistent with what we see with many psychopathic individuals, her need to remain in control of the narrative prevailed right up until the end.
Becoming a parent doesn't stop you from being a psychopath. You can still have psychopathic behaviors and tendencies no matter what role you have in a family. She manipulated her ex-husband and used their children as pawns. They were her tools, unfortunately, to exact harm against her ex-husband.
There are female killers, and yes, they're very violent, but they are rare. I think that's important to say. 80 to 90% of homicides are committed by men. And the remaining homicides that are committed by women, most of it is in self-defense. That is not true of men.
It's important to focus on cases of women who are psychopaths because it's a cultural blind spot. It helps us remember that there are female psychopaths and there's male psychopaths, and that to be equally protected against both, I think we need to be able to look for those signs and understand how sometimes cultural stereotypes will blind us right away to seeing those signs.
The female psychopath, while it is a seemingly rare population, what we also do know, which is somewhat humbling, is that the female psychopath may go more undetected. What makes them more dangerous is that they blend in. They are upstanding members of society.
At 2:17 a.m., a deputy parked on the shoulder of a two-lane road outside Lubbock kills the engine and listens. Because the silence feels wrong, because Texas nights usually breathe, and tonight they don't. And in that stillness, a call crackles through the radio with a name that will not let go for 20 years. A year stamped like a bruise on the county ledger, 2003, and a word that will haunt every headline after it, cold case, because this is how it begins. Not with a scream, but with the absence of one. Not with blood, but with a gap where a life should be. And by sunrise, the town will wake to a missing woman and the sense that something has already gone terribly off script. She is 28, local, known, ordinary in the way that makes disappearance louder. The kind of ordinary that neighbors remember in fragments. A smile at the mailbox, a truck idling in the driveway, a porch light left on past midnight, and by morning those fragments will harden into testimony. Each one sharp enough to cut. Her car is found first, a sedan angled wrong at the edge of a cotton field, door unlocked, keys gone, dust undisturbed, as if the night itself had paused to watch. No skid marks. No footprints. The glove compartment neat. The seat pushed back like someone taller drove last. The smell inside is stale heat and something metallic that doesn't belong, but there is no body, no weapon, no note, just the feeling that the ground has swallowed a person whole. By noon the word spreads the way Texas wind does, fast and dry, a missing persons bulletin tacked to the grocery store corkboard. A sheriff's press conference heavy with careful verbs, was last seen, believed to have been traveling, no sign of foul play at this time. And behind the microphones a line of deputies already sweating, because this is the part they hate, the empty beginning, the map with nothing to pin. Search dogs circle the field and lose the scent at the ditch, helicopters comb the mesquite, volunteers form lines with bottled water and hope, and every hour that passes tightens the air, because everyone here knows what the hours do. The first lead arrives wearing a familiar face. A neighbor says they heard arguing after midnight, a man's voice low, sharp, cut off by a slammed door. Another neighbor remembers a truck idling too long, headlights off, a habit that feels innocent until it doesn't. A clerk at a gas station 10 miles east thinks they saw her buy cigarettes at 1:43 a.m. Thinks is the word that will plague this case, because memory under pressure bends. The receipt is gone. The tape is grainy. The figure on screen could be anyone or no one. Investigators write it all down and feel the weight settle, because they know how this story often goes and how rarely it ends clean. Then the house. The front door locked. The back window unlatched. Inside, the television paused mid-sentence, a glass sweating on the coffee table, lipstick on the rim. In the bedroom, a drawer pulled open, a space where something personal should be. Jewelry? Cash? A letter? No one can say for sure. There is a stain on the carpet that tests negative for blood, which somehow makes it worse, because now there is a mark without meaning, a clue that refuses to speak. In the kitchen trash, a torn envelope addressed in a familiar hand, half the return address missing, the postmark smudged. The lab will later say there's nothing to be done with it. Not yet. The family gathers under the weight of cameras. Faces fold inward. A father stares past questions like they're dust. A mother grips a photograph so hard the edges curl. A sister speaks in short sentences, says she'll come home, says she always does, and the town wants to believe her because belief feels like action when action is thin. Rumors creep in where facts are shy. An ex-boyfriend with a temper. A co-worker who lingered. A debt no one knew about. Each rumor flares, burns oxygen, leaves ash. Detectives chase them anyway, because that's the job, because sometimes ash hides embers. Days turn to weeks. The field yields nothing. The ditch gives up a shoe that doesn't match, a piece of plastic that could have fallen from any truck. Phone records show a call placed at 1:58 a.m., 30 seconds long, to a number that goes dead when traced. A burner? A wrong digit? The carrier shrugs. Technology in 2003 is a blunt instrument, and the case begins to bruise against its limits. The press asks harder questions. The sheriff's tone changes. Words like abduction and homicide enter the briefings and refuse to leave. Then comes the first shock, the kind that snaps a room awake. A witness steps forward months later, swears they saw her at a roadside diner after 2 a.m., swears she was with a man she called family, swears because guilt has been eating them alive. The diner is 30 miles west. The timeline fractures. Family. The word lands wrong, heavy, and suddenly the investigation pivots, slow at first, then all at once, because family is both shelter and shadow, because history hides there, because secrets keep their best masks close to home. Background checks widen. Old arguments resurface. A financial dispute from years back, settled on paper, unresolved in the blood. A will change quietly. A life insurance policy taken out and forgotten. The detectives feel the case thicken, feel the threads draw toward a knot they've learned to respect. Interviews grow longer. Voices crack. Doors close. A brother-in-law's alibi slips an inch. A cousin's timeline shifts under light. No one breaks. Everyone is offended. The town takes sides and learns how quickly loyalty can become a blindfold. The evidence resists. No body means no scene. No scene means no story the courtroom will accept. Prosecutors hover and retreat. The case cools by degrees, not all at once, like coals under ash, and the phrase cold case starts appearing in the margins, in the notes written late at night, in the sighs exchanged over coffee. Detectives rotate. Files are boxed. The family ages on camera. Birthdays pass without candles. Anniversaries turn into vigils. The field grows back over itself. Texas keeps moving. Years later, a lab technician opens a freezer drawer and finds an envelope with a date that shouldn't still matter, and because science has learned new tricks, because old questions don't mind being asked again, the case breathes. A partial print lifted from the car door handle, dismissed in 2003 as too smudged, yields a whisper now. Not a name, a direction. The whisper points inward, toward bloodlines, toward a set of initials that make a prosecutor sit up straight. Cold case. Cracked. The words flirt with each other in the press before anyone can stop them. Subpoenas fly. Bank records bloom like maps. A transfer here. A payment there. The family secret, once buried under manners and holidays, cracks the surface. In court, a witness finally says what they've rehearsed for years, says the fight was about money and shame, says the night ended with a threat no one took seriously, says because time has thinned the fear. The room leans forward. Cameras click. Headlines sharpen their knives. Texas 2003 cold case cracked. Family secret explodes in court. But listen closely to the pauses, to the way the judge clears their throat, to the prosecutor choosing verbs like stepping stones, because the truth here does not stand up on its own, because every revelation leaves a shadow intact. The defense tears at the gaps. Where is the body? Where is the weapon? Where is the moment that cannot be explained away by grief and coincidence? The jury watches the clock. The town holds its breath again, older now, wary of miracles. Outside, the night settles the way it always has, cicadas reclaiming the air, the road shoulder quiet, and somewhere a deputy kills the engine and listens, because silence still feels wrong, because a life is still missing, because cracked is not the same as solved. And in the echo of a family secret spoken aloud for the first time, the cold case exhales but does not close, leaving behind a question that refuses to be escorted out of the room, waiting, patient, for the next voice brave or broken enough to speak. The courtroom air turns stale as testimony stretches into hours and then days, words stacking like sandbags against a flood that never quite comes, and outside the county the wind keeps pushing dust across the highway. Covering tire marks the way time covers intentions. Because while the press sharpens its verbs and the banners keep saying cracked, the truth inside this room keeps slipping sideways, refusing to settle, and every person who takes the stand seems to bring a version of the night that fits their own survival. A friend remembers a phone call that ended abruptly, a laugh cut short, static swallowing the rest. A coworker swears she mentioned leaving town, just for a while, just to think, but can't remember where or why. A cousin testifies with eyes fixed on the floor, confirms the argument, confirms the money, confirms the threat, and then hesitates when asked about the ride, about the truck, about who else was there, and that hesitation hums louder than anything said out loud. Jurors exchange glances. The prosecutor presses. The defense waits, patient as a hunter who knows the field. The partial print becomes a star witness without a voice, enlarged on a screen until it looks like terrain, ridges like roads, valleys like ditches, a map that promises direction but not arrival. An expert explains probability in careful sentences, says consistent, says cannot exclude, says science has limits, and the words hang there precise and useless, because the jury wants a door that opens, not a corridor that loops. The defense smiles thinly and asks about contamination, about chain of custody, about 2003 labs and 2023 confidence, and doubt leaks in the way water finds seams. Behind the scenes, investigators chase the whisper harder, pulling on threads that were too sensitive years ago, knocking on doors that stayed shut when fear was fresh. An old neighbor finally admits to hearing a second vehicle, not the truck everyone talked about, something smaller, faster, gone before the porch light flicked off. A mechanic remembers repairing a dented fender days later, paid in cash, no receipt, no questions, because questions in a small town can cost you work. The name attached to that car sits uncomfortably close to the family tree, close enough to make holidays tight and memories selective. Money keeps surfacing like a body that won't stay down. Accounts drained in careful increments. A policy beneficiary changed and changed back. A loan signed with a hand that later denied it. The motive sharpens and then blunts, because money explains movement but not mercy, and nothing here suggests mercy was present. The prosecutor leans on betrayal, on blood turning inward, on the kind of violence that doesn't need a stranger's mask. The defense leans on chaos, on coincidence, on the American truth that bad things happen without a plan, and then we write plans around them. The town fractures under the strain. Yard signs appear and disappear. Conversations end when certain names are mentioned. The grocery store aisle becomes a gauntlet. Some people want closure so badly, they will accept a shape that looks like it. Others feel the wrongness in their gut and can't shake it. The missing woman's mother sits through it all, hands folded, face set, watching as the story of her child is handled by people who never knew her laugh. And when she leaves each day, she walks past cameras that are already turning toward the next update. Outside of court, the land keeps secrets better than people. Search teams return to the field with new maps and older eyes, probing culverts, dragging ponds, following the logic of someone who knew these roads and knew how to leave no mark. They find bones that belong to cattle, a tarp shredded by weather, a ring that turns out to be costume jewelry dropped by a volunteer years back. Each find sparks a rush, then a letdown, then a deeper quiet, because hope learned to flinch a long time ago. A retired detective breaks his silence to a reporter over coffee, says the case always felt wrong, says the timeline bent too neatly, says someone wanted it to look like panic when it was patience instead. He talks about a gap between midnight and 2 that never filled, about a call that didn't fit, about a door locked from the inside that shouldn't have been, and the reporter nods and writes and wonders how much of this is clarity and how much is memory rearranging itself to survive regret. In court, a surprise witness takes the stand, someone no one expected to speak, someone who left town years ago and built a quieter life far from cotton fields and headlines. Their voice shakes but holds. They talk about a confession that wasn't a confession, about a sentence dropped like bait, about a night ride and a promise that everything would be taken care of. The defense objects. The judge allows part and disallows part. The jury leans in and then sits back as the edges are trimmed, because truth here arrives redacted. The phrase cold case echoes without being spoken, a presence felt in the way everyone watches the clock, aware that time is both ally and enemy. Technology keeps offering maybes. A geolocation estimate paints a blur near the diner, then retracts. A voice analysis suggests stress, then cautions against overreach. Each tool brings light and shadow together, and the shadow keeps winning. The prosecutor's closing leans into the family secret, into motive and opportunity braided tight, into the human instinct to protect oneself at any cost. The defense closes with absence, with the empty chair where a body should be, with the law's demand for certainty, not stories. Deliberations stretch. The town waits again. Radios hum in trucks. Phones vibrate with speculation. When the verdict comes, it is not the thunder anyone imagined. It lands unevenly, a mix that satisfies no one, a decision that speaks to belief more than proof. One charge sticks. Another slides off. Sentencing is scheduled and then postponed. Appeals are promised. The headlines keep their teeth but lose some shine, because cracked sounds less convincing when the fracture doesn't run clean. Afterward, the family gathers without cameras and argues about what was won and what was lost. Some say justice moved forward. Others say it tripped. The missing woman's room remains untouched, a museum of paused life, and at night her sister dreams of headlights on a dirt road and wakes with the taste of dust. The field is quieter now, but quiet in Texas has a way of remembering. Years continue to pass, even after the gavel falls. A tip line lights up and dims. A letter arrives with no return address, claims knowledge, offers nothing verifiable. A storm washes out a creek bed and exposes scraps that turn out to be nothing. The case file grows heavier with appendices and lighter with certainty. Cold case becomes a habit of mind, a lens through which every new fact is examined and found wanting. And somewhere between the courtroom's echo and the open road, the story refuses to end. The secret that exploded did not destroy everything. It rearranged it, leaving behind a shape that looks like resolution from a distance and like absence up close. At night, deputies still pull over and listen. Reporters still call sources who say they're done talking. The town still holds its breath in small, unconscious ways. Because a life is still missing. Because the map still has blank spaces. Because in Texas, 2003 never quite lets go, and the cold case, cracked or not, keeps its grip patient as the land, waiting for the one detail that hasn't learned how to hide. The appeal grinds forward the way machinery does when no one is watching, slow, relentless, gears turning behind closed doors, and the town learns a new rhythm of waiting, because verdicts don't end stories here, they just change their temperature. The record is combed again, every phrase weighed, every pause annotated, and in those margins old doubts find room to breathe. A juror gives an interview and insists the decision was careful, insists the absence mattered, insists that doubt is not the same as denial, and the internet hears what it wants to hear, slicing the soundbite into weapons and shields, because everyone needs a side when the truth refuses to pick one. Investigators return to the beginning with newer eyes and older bones. They rewalk the road where the sedan angled wrong, measure the ditch again, note how the moon would have fallen that night, where shadows pooled and where they fled. Someone notices the car's orientation doesn't match a hurried stop, that the wheels are straight when panic tends to twist them. Another points out the dust pattern on the trunk, suggests it was closed somewhere else. Small things, the kind that mean nothing until they mean everything, and even then they argue among themselves. A former deputy, long retired, admits to a mistake he carried like a stone. In 2003, he waved off a report of a second sedan seen near the field, chalked it up to nerves and darkness, and now he sits at a kitchen table with a recorder blinking red, explaining how young he was, how busy, how certain that the main story was already forming. The reporter nods and asks where that road leads now. The deputy stares into his coffee and says nowhere clean. Records from the diner surface again, this time with a new angle. A waitress who quit weeks after the disappearance had written something in a notebook she never turned over, a sketch of a man's jacket, a patch she couldn't place, a habit of tapping the counter twice before speaking. The notebook appears years later in a box of letters sent to a sister, and when it's compared to security stills, the match is suggestive but not obedient. Suggestive is the word that keeps stalking this case, dressed like promise, behaving like trouble. The family secret, once cracked open, proves to have layers. The money dispute was real, yes, but it was not alone. There was a relationship that crossed lines everyone pretended were fences, a bond that burned fast and demanded silence. Texts were deleted. Emails were purged. A prepaid phone appears in the evidence room with a sticker still on the battery, activated the week before the night that matters and deactivated the morning after. The number dialed at 1:58 a.m. glows on a screen again, traced now through a maze of resellers and shell accounts until it lands on a name already exhausted by suspicion and somehow still untouched. A new search begins not with dogs but with ground-penetrating radar, grids laid across land that has been plowed and replanted so many times it feels complicit. The machine hums and paints ghostly images on a monitor, anomalies like bruises beneath the skin of the earth. Teams mark spots with flags that flutter and snap, each one a small promise to the waiting cameras. They dig. They find debris, old fence posts, a buried tire, nothing that answers the question everyone is afraid to say out loud. The flags come down. The land exhales. In court filings, language tightens. Words like prejudice and error replace grief and shock. The appeal argues the family secret poisoned the jury, that emotion did the work evidence could not. The state replies with patterns and probabilities, with a story that still fits if you squint. Judges read and reread, aware that whatever they decide will not give the missing woman back, will not return the town to the before it keeps misremembering. The decision, when it comes, sends the case back down the ladder, not freed, not finished, just altered enough to reopen wounds everyone learned to live around. A journalist receives a package without a return address, postmarked 2 counties over. Inside, photocopies of bank statements already known and one handwritten note that says look where the road bends twice. No name. No threat. The reporter drives out at dusk, past the diner, past the field, to a stretch of asphalt that curves around a stand of trees, and then curves again, the kind of place drivers slow without thinking. In the ditch, hidden under brush, they find rusted metal and the remains of a tarp. The sheriff is called. The tarp turns out to be old, unrelated. The metal is scrap. The note becomes another item on a shelf already sagging. The sister dreams differently now. Not headlights, but water, dark and patient, carrying voices she can't quite hear. She wakes and checks the window, checks the phone, checks the calendar as if dates might rearrange themselves overnight. She joins an online forum for families of the missing and learns the language of endurance, the acronyms, the way hope narrows into a blade that cuts both ways. She posts once, deletes it, posts again, and strangers answer with sympathy that feels both warm and far away. A private investigator enters the frame with the confidence of someone who believes fresh eyes matter more than fresh facts. He talks to the mechanic again and hears a detail missed. The dent was high, not low, as if struck by a taller vehicle, as if the collision happened at an angle. He interviews a tow operator who remembers moving a car off a back road that week, late, paid in cash, destination vague. The operator swears the interior smelled like bleach. Records are gone. Memory remains, flawed and insistent. The appeal hearing brings everyone back into the same room, older faces, familiar tension. The judge asks pointed questions about the print, about the note, about the witness who trimmed their truth to fit an objection. Lawyers answer with practiced restraint. The gallery leans forward at the wrong moments and sighs at the right ones. Outside, cameras frame the steps and wait for movement that looks like meaning. When the ruling comes, it splits the difference, a compromise dressed as clarity. Some evidence stands. Some falls away. The sentence shifts. The headlines rewrite themselves. Crack becomes complicated. Cold case becomes cold again, with a fever that flares unpredictably. The convicted appeals again. The state prepares. The town returns to its routines, altered just enough to remember. Late one night, a patrol unit stops a truck for a broken taillight near the bend that bends twice. The driver's hands shake. The officer smells nothing unusual and writes a warning. As the truck pulls away, something clatters in the bed, a sound that makes the officer pause, because it sounds like metal on metal, like something not meant to be loose. He shrugs it off. The radio crackles. Another call. Another night. An archivist digitizing old tapes finds a mislabeled cassette from a local radio station. An overnight call-in show from the week after the disappearance. A caller's voice, distorted by time and cheap equipment, says they know where she is and laughs, then hangs up. The DJ jokes it off. The archivist flags it anyway. Voice analysis compares it to known samples and shrugs. Stress. Performance. The machine declines to guess. The land shifts after a storm, a sinkhole opening near a drainage culvert miles from the field. Crews rope it off. They find trash, old tools, animal bones, nothing human. The image circulates anyway, hope flaring and dying in the space of an afternoon. The missing woman's mother watches the coverage with the sound off, reading captions like they're clues written in a language she almost remembers. Time keeps doing what it does best, pressing forward without asking permission. Children who were toddlers in 2003 graduate. The diner closes. The field changes hands. A new sheriff takes office and vows transparency, reassigns a small team to old cases that refuse to lie down. They pull the file again, now thick with its own history, and feel the familiar resistance, the way it pushes back when you try to impose order. In a quiet office, a young detective pins photos to a board and draws a line from the road to the diner to the bend that bends twice. He notices the distance is shorter than it felt. That familiarity could make it shorter still. He circles the prepaid phone, the cash payments, the second vehicle. He writes family in red and crosses it with opportunity in blue. He steps back and feels the shape almost click, almost. Outside, the night breathes again, cicadas loud enough to feel, and somewhere a deputy kills the engine and listens, because silence still feels wrong, because this story has learned how to survive verdicts and appeals and storms, because in Texas the past doesn't fade so much as it waits. And the cold case, stubborn and unfinished, keeps leaning toward the light, daring someone to say the one thing that will finally make it stop moving. The new team works after hours, because daylight brings noise and noise brings pressure, and pressure bends judgment, and they can't afford that now. They spread the file across a table scarred by decades of coffee rings and carved initials, and the room fills with the quiet click of pens and the low hum of an old refrigerator, a soundtrack that feels appropriate for a case that never learned how to sleep. They don't start with suspects. They start with minutes. They build the night again, not as a story but as a sequence of movements, each one small enough to be missed, each one capable of hiding a decision. At 1:43 a.m., the possible gas station sighting. At 1:58, the call that lasts half a minute and changes everything. Just after 2 o'clock, the car angled wrong by the field. They draw arrows and then erase them. They ask who benefits from that order and who needs it rearranged. One detective points out how convenient it is for the car to appear where it does, how it anchors the narrative to a place everyone knows, how it keeps attention away from roads that don't like witnesses. Another circles the diner again, not as a destination but as a pivot, a place to be seen or to be mistaken for someone else. They re-interview the tow operator with a recorder this time, the red light making honesty feel heavier. He repeats the bleach smell and adds something new, a detail that didn't feel important until it did. The driver wore gloves though it wasn't cold, cheap latex, the kind you buy by the box. Gloves mean planning. Gloves mean time. Gloves mean the night wasn't improvisation, it was execution. The operator can't remember the face. He remembers the hands. A box of old evidence yields a surprise. A key, untagged, found in the sedan's trunk and dismissed because it didn't fit anything they knew about. The new team runs it through a database of forgotten locks and discovers it matches a storage unit padlock 2 towns over. A unit rented briefly in the spring of 2003 and abandoned after 3 months. The unit was emptied long ago, but the manager remembers the renter, remembers the insistence on privacy, remembers cash paid in advance. The name on the form is false. The handwriting looks familiar. They pull the prepaid phone again and dig deeper than the first pass ever did, following the money backward through resellers who didn't exist then but do now, peeling layers until the origin resolves into a pattern, not a person. Someone knew how to disappear a number. Someone practiced. The call at 1:58 was not panic. It was confirmation. The community reacts the way it always does when a cold case stirs, with a mix of hope and dread that tastes like metal. Old friendships stiffen. New ones hesitate. People check their mirrors longer at stop signs. A local radio host resurrects the case and invites callers to share memories, and the lines light up with fragments that sound important until they don't, with certainty that melts under follow-up, with anger that wants somewhere to land. The missing woman's name trends again, attached to theories that multiply faster than facts. A former juror contacts the sheriff's office and asks to speak off the record. He says there was pressure in the room, not overt, not criminal, just the weight of wanting to finish, wanting to give the town something it could put down. He says the family secret mattered more than he admitted, that it felt explanatory even when it wasn't complete. He says if the key had been there, if the gloves had been there, if the storage unit had been there, he would have argued harder. The detective listens and takes notes and knows that what if is the most dangerous evidence of all. They locate the storage unit site and scan the ground around it with fresh equipment. The radar paints familiar ghosts. They dig and find nothing but disturbed soil and the outline of something once heavy and rectangular. The absence feels deliberate, like a stage after the set has been struck. A neighbor from that time remembers a truck parked late at night, remembers a tarp, remembers the sound of metal scraping concrete. He didn't call it in because it didn't feel like his business. It feels like his business now. Paperwork from the unit reveals a security camera that should have existed but didn't, installed months later after a string of thefts. Bad timing is a theme in this case, a constant alibi. The team grows quiet around it, careful not to anthropomorphize fate, careful not to let frustration pick the next step. They return to the bend that bends twice and walk it at night, headlights off, listening. The road makes sense this way. It offers choices. A lab tech flags the glove compartment liner from the sedan for retesting, a long shot resurrected by a hunch. New methods tease out a trace of something not cataloged before, a fiber that matches a brand of disposable gloves sold regionally in 2003. It's not a fingerprint. It's not DNA. It's context. Context is what this case eats and never digests. The defense files motions as if on cue, arguing prejudice, arguing contamination, arguing that the state is chasing ghosts because ghosts are easier than proof. The prosecution responds with restraint because restraint looks like confidence, and confidence reads well on camera. The judge schedules hearings. The calendar fills. Time, again, does what it wants. A storm hits hard, the kind that turns roads into rivers and fields into mirrors. Floodwaters carve channels that weren't there before. Afterward, a rancher finds something tangled in debris near a culvert far from the original search areas. It's a piece of fabric, old, weathered, human-sized. The sheriff's office seals the site. Cameras arrive. The lab takes custody. Days pass. The result comes back inconclusive, too degraded to tell a story, just enough to reopen every wound. The rancher apologizes to the family for raising hope. The family says thank you anyway. The sister returns to the field alone one evening, stands where the car was found, and tries to feel the night the way it must have felt then. She notices how close the road is, how quickly a door could open and close without sound, how easy it would be to believe you were safe until you weren't. She leaves flowers that won't last and drives away without looking back. An anonymous email lands in the detective's inbox at 3:12 a.m., 3 sentences long, careful, almost polite. It mentions the storage unit, mentions gloves, mentions a place where water moves slowly even when it rains hard. No name. No proof. The IP address is a dead end. The detective forwards it to the team and feels the old electricity hum, the dangerous kind that promises answers and delivers obsession. They survey waterways within a radius that matches the night's logic, focusing on spots accessible without attracting attention, spots where someone who grew up here would know how currents behave. Divers go down in murk and come up with stories of what they felt, not what they found. Sonar paints shapes that dissolve on approach. Each attempt tightens the net and widens the doubt. The appeal court issues another order, narrow and surgical, allowing the new evidence to be considered without reopening everything. The press frames it as momentum. The defense frames it as harassment. The truth sits somewhere between, unsatisfied with both. The judge sets a date. The town marks it and pretends not to. Late one night, the young detective stands alone in the evidence room and opens the box with the untagged key again, turns it over in his fingers, imagines the hand that carried it, gloved or not. He thinks about how many choices the night offered and how few were taken. He thinks about how a family secret can be a lock as much as a key. He closes the box and writes a note to himself that says check the water again after the rains. Outside, Texas breathes through the heat, and the roads shine under moonlight like lines waiting to be read. Somewhere, someone who knows something listens to the radio and changes the station. Somewhere else, a deputy kills the engine and listens because the quiet still feels wrong, because this cold case doesn't move forward so much as it circles, tightening, patient. Waiting for the moment when pressure turns into fracture, and the night finally gives up what it has been holding all these years. The hearing opens without ceremony, because ceremonies imply endings, and no one here believes in those anymore. The judge reads the scope aloud, narrow, controlled, as if language itself could fence in what has been roaming free for 2 decades. New evidence only. No relitigation. No theater. The courtroom nods and settles into the kind of stillness that hums under the skin, and outside the steps fill with cameras that already know which faces to chase. The fiber from the glove compartment comes first, contextual, careful, presented like a breadcrumb rather than a loaf. The expert explains distribution, availability, regional sales, the way a box of gloves could be bought in one place and used in another without leaving a trail worth following at the time. The defense leans back and lets the explanation finish, then rises and dismantles it with questions that turn context into coincidence, coincidence into habit, habit into nothing at all. The judge listens and scribbles and asks for clarification that sounds neutral and lands sharp. Then the storage unit key. It looks small on the evidence table, unremarkable, the kind of thing that disappears into a pocket and stays there until it matters. The state ties it to the abandoned unit, to the false name, to the memory of gloves and tarps and metal scraping concrete. The defense objects to memory. Sustained. The story shrinks and expands by inches, the way it always does, and everyone pretends that inches don't add up to miles. During a recess, a reporter catches the sister in the hallway and asks how it feels. She says it feels like standing on a shoreline while the tide keeps changing its mind. The quote makes the evening news. The comment section eats it alive. The sister goes home and turns off her phone and stares at a wall where a calendar used to hang. The judge rules the evidence admissible with limits that satisfy no one. The date for expanded proceedings is set. The press writes momentum again, in italics this time, as if typography could do the work certainty won't. The defense files a notice of intent to introduce alternative explanations, names redacted, shadows prepped for the stage. Behind the scenes, the water search intensifies, guided by the anonymous email's geography and the detective's note about rain. Crews focus on a slow-moving stretch that locals fish and forget, where reeds muffle sound and the current hides its patience. Sonar returns a shape that refuses to resolve. Divers descend and surface shaking their heads, then descend again because shaking your head doesn't feel like work. They bring up tires, a rusted shopping cart, a safe filled with mud and nothing else. The shape remains a suggestion. A break comes from an unexpected direction. A man in another county is arrested on an unrelated charge and asks for a deal he hasn't earned. He says he knows something about the night in 2003, says he helped move something heavy for cash, says he never knew what it was and doesn't want to now. His story stutters and leaps. Dates blur. Names slip. He insists on anonymity he can't have. Investigators listen and ask the same question 3 different ways until the answers disagree. The man gets quiet and asks for water. They verify what they can. A truck rental. A cash withdrawal. A phone ping near the bend that bends twice. Enough to keep talking. Not enough to build on. The man recants and then half recants, a dance learned in rooms with no windows. The prosecutor writes it all down and draws a box around it labeled maybe and leaves it there. The community grows restless. A candlelight vigil is organized and then canceled when arguments over messaging turn sharp. Yard signs return, simpler this time, just the missing woman's name and a date. Someone spray paints a question mark on one, and someone else scrubs it off before sunrise. The diner's old sign is hauled away, and for a day the town feels lighter, as if removing one landmark might loosen the story's grip. It doesn't. A forensic accountant joins the team and rewires the money story with colder hands. He maps transfers and payments like weather, noting pressure systems and sudden drops. He finds a pattern that points to preparation months in advance, not days, and preparation implies resolve. The defense argues that preparation can be misread, that people plan for many things that never happen. The accountant nods. Planning is not proof, but it is behavior. In the evidence room, the prepaid phone hums to life again under new analysis, its silence louder than any ring. A technician recovers fragments of deleted data that don't make words but make timing, a rhythm that matches the night too well to ignore. The call at 1:58 is flanked by short activations days earlier, test runs that feel like rehearsals. The defense says technology lies. The technician says people rehearse. Another storm rolls through and recedes, and with it the water shifts just enough to reveal what sonar couldn't. A diver's hand brushes fabric caught in branches, heavier than it should be. The recovery is careful, reverent. The cameras are held back. The lab receives what remains and begins the slow work of telling a story that time tried to erase. Days stretch. The town holds its breath in a way that feels practiced. The result comes back partial, maddening, a mosaic missing its center. The fabric matches the storm-torn piece from the culvert in weave and wear. Human origin is likely. Identity is not confirmed. The word likely does damage all by itself, because it invites hope without promising relief. The family is informed in a room with soft chairs and a box of tissues that no one touches. Court resumes with a heavier air. The judge allows mention of the recovery without conclusions. The prosecution threads it into a narrative about routes and choices, about water that moves slowly even when it rains hard. The defense counters with degradation and contamination, with the certainty that nature makes liars of us all. The jury is not present, but the argument feels like rehearsal anyway, a muscle memory that refuses to atrophy. A former friend takes the stand under subpoena and speaks about a conversation that never sat right, about a warning wrapped in concern, about being told to mind her own business and doing exactly that for 20 years. Her voice breaks and then steadies, the way people's voices do when they decide not to stop. The defense questions her timing. She answers with fear. The judge lets it stand and notes the wait for later. Late one evening, the young detective drives the route again, from the diner to the bend to the water, timing it with the clock the way the night must have. It fits too well. He parks and listens and imagines the decisions made in the dark, the confidence that comes from familiarity, the belief that land you know will keep your secrets. He writes nothing down and drives home slower than usual. The anonymous emailer writes again, this time with a photograph taken from a distance, grainy, useless, of a spot near the water before the storm. The metadata is scrubbed. The message says you're close and nothing else. The detective forwards it and feels the familiar prickle of manipulation. Someone wants to be seen without being caught. Someone wants control. The appeal court issues guidance that reads like a warning. Proceed carefully. The defense files more motions. The prosecution narrows again. The calendar fills again. Time does what it always does, slipping past our grip and leaving fingerprints we pretend not to see. On the anniversary of the disappearance, the town gathers without signs or speeches. People stand and listen to the cicadas and the road and the water moving somewhere beyond the lights. The sister steps forward and says one sentence, not for the cameras, not for the record, just into the night. Say her name. The crowd does once together, and then the sound dissolves. In a quiet office, the judge reads filings long after dark and pauses over a line about water and preparation and gloves. He knows the law is a blunt instrument and wishes, briefly, for something sharper. He sets a hearing date and closes the file and leaves the light on. Somewhere else, a person who has been careful for a long time listens to the radio and hears their own past described in cautious terms. They turn the volume down and sit with it, calculating, remembering how close is too close. Outside, Texas breathes through the heat, and the water keeps moving slowly even when it rains hard, and the cold case leans forward again, not solved, not silent, waiting for the moment when patience runs out and the night finally decides what it's willing to give back. The expanded proceedings begin under fluorescent lights that flatten faces and make truth look tired, and the judge reminds everyone again that this is not a retrial, that boundaries matter, that the law is a narrow bridge over a wide river. The lawyers nod like students who know the lesson and plan to test it anyway. Outside, rain threatens and then doesn't, clouds gathering and dispersing as if undecided about their role in all this. The state opens with time. Not dates, not calendars, but time as behavior. Preparation time. Travel time. The time it takes to put on gloves and the time it takes to take them off. The time between rehearsals and performance. They build the night as a machine with tolerances, showing how each piece fits without forcing it, and the fit is what makes people lean forward. The defense counters with the same material, rotated just enough to look different, arguing that machines are imagined after the fact, that chaos pretends to be design when you squint hard enough. A technician testifies about the prepaid phone's rhythm, the short activations that feel like testing a door handle before you try it for real. He explains how silence can be a signature, how people who plan minimize noise, how patterns hide best when they're small. The defense asks about false positives, about hobbyists and coincidence, about how many other phones did the same thing that month. The technician answers, and the answers land softly, because softness is what uncertainty sounds like when it's being honest. The man who asked for a deal is brought back in, thinner now, eyes darting like they're counting exits. He sticks closer to his story this time, or maybe the story sticks closer to him. He describes the weight again, the way it shifted when lifted, the way someone corrected his grip without speaking. He says the gloves were there. He says the tarp was blue. He says he was told not to ask questions and didn't, because not asking is its own kind of skill. The defense pulls the thread of incentive until the testimony frays, and the judge trims it back to what can stand without leaning. A map appears on the screen, clean lines over messy ground. The route from the diner to the bend to the water is traced in red. The travel time measured twice, once at the speed limit and once the way locals actually drive at night. The difference is minutes. Minutes matter. The defense points out other routes, other waters, other minutes that could mean anything. The prosecutor nods and agrees and returns to the one route that keeps showing up like a refrain. During a break, a bailiff overhears two spectators arguing in whispers. One convinced the case is finally turning, the other convinced it's a mirage. The bailiff says nothing. He has learned that certainty is louder than it deserves to be. The judge allows limited testimony about the diver's recovery. Careful language only, no conclusions, no identity. The diver speaks plainly, describes feel and resistance, describes how water teaches patience. He does not describe emotion. Emotion would be trimmed. The defense asks if the water could move objects miles over years. The diver says yes. He also says sometimes it doesn't. Both answers are true. Only one helps. A former accountant from the insurance company appears via deposition, hair grayer, voice steadier. He explains the policy changes again and adds a detail overlooked, a phone call that asked about waiting periods and exclusions, questions that sound like planning when you hear them twice. The defense suggests curiosity. The accountant agrees curiosity exists. He also says curiosity usually asks fewer questions. The sister is called, not as a witness to facts but as a keeper of context, and the judge allows it with strict limits. She talks about routines, about the way her sister hated that stretch of road at night and avoided it unless she had a reason. She talks about the porch light and the glass on the table and how small things can be loud. The defense objects to speculation. Sustained. The sister rephrases and stays inside the lines, voice steady, eyes dry. The room listens differently to someone who has learned how to carry weight. Outside, the rain finally comes, sudden and hard, drumming on the courthouse roof and flattening sound into a hiss. The power flickers and holds. Inside, the prosecutor presses the idea of familiarity again, the confidence that comes from knowing we're not to be seen. The defense presses randomness, the cruelty of chance. The judge takes notes and asks a question about gloves that makes both sides pause. The answer does not satisfy him. He writes more. The anonymous emailer goes quiet. No new messages. No hints. The detective feels the absence like a pressure drop and doesn't trust it. He assigns a junior officer to monitor the water levels and another to pull weather records from 2003, cross-referencing rainfall with river behavior. The patterns don't scream. They whisper. A forensic botanist testifies about plant matter caught in the recovered fabric, species that grow along slow water and species that don't. The defense points out transfer. The botanist agrees and explains likelihoods like he's teaching a child to count. Likelihoods don't convict. They accumulate. In chambers, the judge confers with counsel and warns them about overreach, about turning a narrow bridge into a parade route. Both sides promise restraint and sharpen their knives anyway. The calendar tightens. The press speculates. The town checks the weather and the docket like they're the same thing. A late discovery surfaces from an old evidence bag mislabeled and ignored. A receipt from a hardware store dated weeks before the disappearance, gloves and tarp on the same line, cash payment, store within a reasonable drive. The defense challenges chain of custody. The state admits the mistake and argues relevance. The judge allows it with a warning that feels like a raised eyebrow. The receipt looks small on the screen. It feels heavy in the room. The man with the broken taillight from months ago is pulled in for questioning after his truck is spotted near the water again. Nothing illegal. Nothing actionable, just proximity that makes nerves itch. He answers politely and leaves with a warning and a look that lingers too long. The detective writes it down and tells himself not to chase reflections. The proceedings stretch into evening, voices flattening, words losing their edges. The judge calls it for the day and sets the next morning's order. People file out under umbrellas and the rain makes everything smell like earth and metal. The sister walks alone to her car and sits with the door open, listening to the water run along the curb, counting seconds like they might add up to something useful. At home, the young detective pins the hardware receipt beneath the map and steps back. He sees how it fits and refuses to let himself enjoy that. Enjoyment is a trap. He calls the dive team and asks for one more pass at a specific bend downstream. Not because he expects anything new, but because persistence has a way of loosening things that patience alone won't. The next morning, the courtroom fills again. The judge announces he will take certain matters under advisement, that he will not be rushed by headlines or anniversaries. The words sound firm. They sound tired. He reminds everyone that law moves at the speed it must. Outside, a radio host says the same thing with different emphasis and sells ads between breaths. Divers return to the water and come up with nothing but silt and stories. The river keeps its counsel. The detective thanks them and feels the familiar ache settle, the one that comes from doing everything right and still being wrong. Back in court, closing arguments for the expanded evidence begin. The state leans on accumulation, on behavior that repeats until it becomes intention. The defense leans on absence, on the empty center that no amount of context can fill. Both are persuasive. Neither is complete. The judge listens with his head tilted, like he's trying to catch a frequency just beyond hearing. When it's over, he takes the file back to chambers and leaves the lights on again. He will read late. He always does. The town waits and pretends it isn't waiting. The water moves slowly even when it rains hard. The roads shine. Somewhere, someone counts minutes and adjusts plans. Somewhere else, a deputy kills the engine and listens because silence still feels wrong, because this cold case is tightening again, not snapping, not yielding, just drawing breath for whatever comes next. The ruling does not arrive with drama. It slips into the morning like heat, already there before anyone names it. The judge issues findings that read careful and sound sharp, allowing more than the defense wanted and less than the state hoped for. A narrow lane through the fog that keeps the case moving without pretending it's clear. The words admissible and limited sit side by side like rivals forced to share a bench. Outside, the cameras translate restraint into momentum and the town exhales, just a little, because movement is easier to live with than stillness. The state adjusts its posture and advances, tightening the frame around behavior and preparation, trimming away anything that looks like guesswork. The defense counters by shrinking the frame further, insisting that the law demands a center that still isn't there. Both sides talk about responsibility without saying guilt. Both avoid the word closure, like it might curse the room. A new witness is called, an engineer who specializes in traffic flow and nighttime visibility. He talks about headlights and angles, about how certain bends swallow light and others throw it back, about how a car could stop and start without announcing itself. He demonstrates with diagrams that look simple until you imagine them in the dark. The defense asks if this applies everywhere. He says no, it applies here. The young detective testifies for the first time, voice steady, eyes trained on the bench. He walks the court through the timeline reconstruction, minute by minute, emphasizing choices rather than conclusions. He avoids naming suspects. He talks about options narrowing, about how familiarity collapses risk. The defense presses him on assumptions. He agrees they exist. He also says assumptions are where you begin, not where you end. In the gallery, someone stifles a sob when the porch light comes up again, described not as symbolism but as fact. A light left on is a decision that expects a return. The judge notes it and moves on. The anonymous emailer returns with a different tone, shorter, colder. One sentence. You're looking too close to the road. No image. No coordinates. The detective reads it twice and forwards it once, resisting the urge to reply, resisting the urge to ask for anything. Attention is currency. He won't spend it. Search teams widen the radius inland, away from water and away from traffic, toward pockets of land that were overlooked because they were inconvenient, parceled oddly, forgotten between ownership changes. They walk through waist-high grass and mesquite that grabs at clothes like it wants to be remembered. They find a fire pit filled with ash from different years, nothing human, nothing useful. They log it anyway. Logging is faith. A woman comes forward after watching the engineer's testimony and recognizes the diagrams. She says she once followed a truck down a service road near one of those light-swallowing bends and turned back because it felt wrong. She didn't report it because nothing happened. She says she remembers gloves on the steering wheel when the truck passed her, pale against dark. Memory is a fragile witness, but sometimes it's all you have. The judge allows her statement for context only. Context keeps growing. The defense introduces an alternative narrative built on coincidence and opportunism. A stranger passing through, a bad night intersecting with an open road. They produce maps of crime along highways, statistics that hum with authority. The state responds by pointing out how few strangers plan rehearsals weeks in advance, how often opportunism leaves noise. The judge listens and asks about noise. Both sides answer carefully. Rain returns, lighter this time, a persistent mist that blurs edges. Divers stand down. Ground teams push on. A dog alerts near a stand of trees and then loses the scent. The handler shrugs and marks the spot, losing his information too. The accountant returns briefly to clarify a transfer that didn't fit before. It fits now barely, like a puzzle piece that's been shaved down. The defense argues that shaving is the problem. The judge agrees in part and limits the weight. Limits are the language of this phase. The sister watches from the back, hands folded, learning the posture of patience all over again. She notices how often people avoid saying her sister's name and how often they say time instead. She says the name to herself like a talisman. A late afternoon surprise lands when a lab report updates the fabric analysis with a detail that was there all along but unreadable until now. A trace dye consistent with a Tarp brand sold at the same hardware store as the receipt. Consistent, not conclusive. The word lands anyway. The defense asks for a sidebar. The judge grants it. Voices drop. The room holds its breath and lets it go when the bench conference ends without fireworks. Outside, a protest forms and dissolves, signs folded and tucked away like umbrellas when the rain stops. The town is learning not to spend its energy all at once. The anonymous emailer sends a final message just before midnight. Check the ground where the sound dies. That's it. The detective reads it and thinks about places where engines fade and wind takes over, about culverts and berms, and the way land muffles secrets. He doesn't sleep much. At dawn, a search team heads to a narrow strip of county land behind an old industrial lot, a place where trucks idle and then move on, where sound drops quickly. They find disturbed soil beneath brush that looks newer than it should. They call it in. Protocol snaps into place. Cameras are kept back. The dig is careful, almost tender. They uncover debris first, then something that stops everyone from speaking at once. What they find is not enough and too much at the same time. Fragments. Time-worn. Human likely. Identity uncertain. The lab will take days. The family is notified again in the same soft room with the same untouched tissues. The sister closes her eyes and opens them and asks the only question that matters. Is it her? The answer does not come. Court pauses out of respect and resumes because the law does not know how to do anything else. The judge acknowledges the discovery without allowing conclusions. The prosecution adjusts again. The defense asks for exclusion. The judge defers and sets another hearing. The calendar tightens until it squeaks. The media declares a turning point. The word tastes premature. Investigators avoid it. They've learned that turning points can turn back. When the lab results arrive, they refuse to settle. The fragments match the environment. The age range overlaps. There is not enough left to say yes. There is not enough to say no. The word inconclusive spreads like a bruise. The family absorbs it with the practiced numbness of people who have carried worse. In chambers, the judge reads the report and presses his fingers to his eyes. He knows what the public wants. He knows what the law requires. He sets parameters and writes an order that keeps the evidence in orbit without letting it land. The balance is exhausting. The defense files motions at dawn. The state responds by noon. The case accelerates and stalls in alternating beats that feel designed to test endurance. The sister stops watching the news and listens to the radio instead, the familiar voices grounding her in a town that still exists beyond headlines. One evening, the young detective returns to the bend and turns off the engine. He listens. The wind moves through grass. A truck passes far off, and then nothing. He thinks about sound dying and choices being made in that quiet. He writes a note and tucks it into the file. Sound dies where land is willing. As the next hearing approaches, tension tightens into something brittle. The judge will decide what the fragments mean for the scope. The lawyers will argue. The town will watch. The water will keep moving slowly, even if it doesn't rain at all. And the cold case, patient and stubborn, will lean forward again, not to finish, not to forgive, but to remind everyone that some nights never stop asking for an answer, and some answers refuse to be complete. The next hearing unfolds under a sky that can't decide what it wants to be, clouds thinning and thickening like thoughts that won't settle. And inside the courtroom, the judge sets the tone early, reminding everyone that fragments are not conclusions. That likelihoods do not get to where certainties coat. The words cool the room, but they don't kill the current running underneath, because everyone knows this is where the case could tilt or sink back into its long, practiced weight. The state argues first, not loudly, not emotionally, but with a precision that feels rehearsed because it is. They say fragments change context, that context reshapes behavior, that behavior points inward, always inward, toward preparation and familiarity, and a night that unfolded the way it was meant to. They say no single piece carries the weight, but together the pieces hum. The defense stands and lets the hum die in the air, then rebuilds silence, insisting that absence still sits at the center, untouched by all this careful motion, that the law does not convict on atmosphere. The judge asks about thresholds, about where accumulation becomes overreach. The answers are cautious. Caution is the only honest posture left. Outside, the discovery site behind the industrial lot becomes a pilgrimage point for cameras and curiosity, a rectangle of taped-off dirt that looks smaller every day. Neighbors complain about traffic and then apologize for complaining. A worker from the lot remembers seeing lights there late one night years ago, remembers thinking it was maintenance, remembers thinking nothing. He offers the memory now and hates himself for not offering it sooner. Investigators take it and file it and know what it's worth. The lab works the fragments again with tools that didn't exist when the case was young, coaxing whispers from bone and fiber. The results come back in layers, none of them definitive, all of them suggestive, the scientific equivalent of a half-remembered dream. Age range tightens. Environmental markers align. Identity still refuses to show its face. The word consistent appears again and again, tapping the glass. The defense seizes on that word and builds a wall from it, brick by brick, arguing that consistency is a wide field and the law demands a narrow gate. The state nods and points to the gate they believe they've already walked through, to preparation, to gloves and tarps and rehearsals, to money and silence and a family secret that didn't just crack, it bled. The judge listens and takes notes that look like geometry. The anonymous emailer stays silent, and the silence is louder now, suspect in its timing. The detective resists the urge to chase it, to send bait, to force a response. He has learned that whoever is behind it likes control, and control withers when ignored. He turns instead to land records and old permits, to parcels carved up and recombined, to forgotten corners where sound goes to die. He circles a location on a map, and doesn't tell anyone yet. In the gallery, a man stands up and leaves during testimony about gloves, unable to sit through it. Someone notices. Someone writes it down. It becomes nothing, or maybe it becomes something later. This case has taught everyone to save maybes. A former classmate of the missing woman gives a television interview that night and talks about her kindness, her stubbornness, the way she hated unfinished things. The clip goes viral, and people argue about relevance like it's a sport. The sister watches it once and turns it off, because personality is not evidence, and grief doesn't need an audience. The judge rules that the fragments may be referenced for context, but not argued as identity. The line is clear. The state adjusts again. The defense smiles without warmth. The calendar shifts. The case moves and doesn't. Search teams continue inland, quieter now, more deliberate, following the detective's circle. They find old burn pits and scrap piles, signs of activity that fit the region and the era and nothing else. They mark them and move on. The land offers plenty of places to hide and few reasons to confess. A new expert appears briefly, a behavioral analyst who speaks about secrecy inside families, about how proximity breeds confidence, about how shared history can become shared silence. The defense objects to profiling. The judge allows generalities only. Generalities fill the room and then dissipate, leaving behind the feeling of being seen without being named. The sister is asked again how she's holding up. She answers again with restraint. She has learned that restraint is the only thing people can't take from her. Late one night, the detective drives past the industrial lot and keeps going to the circled location, a narrow strip of land bordered by scrub and a shallow ravine where sound falls away fast. He turns off the engine and listens. Wind moves through grass. A train horn sounds far off and then fades. He walks the perimeter and notices something subtle, a depression that doesn't match erosion, a patch of ground that drains differently. He marks it with GPS and leaves without touching anything. The next day, he brings a small team back with proper clearance. They dig carefully and find nothing at first, then debris that tells a story of movement, not of rest. Tire tracks fossilized into soil layers. A piece of plastic sheeting too degraded to place. It's not a grave. It's a stop. The idea lands heavy. Someone moved through here. Someone paused. In court, the defense introduces doubt with confidence. pointing to the new dig as proof of scattershot desperation. The state counters that desperation looks different when it's unplanned. The judge warns both sides against rhetoric and keeps the focus narrow. Narrow is the theme. The lab confirms the plastic sheeting is similar to tarp material, but cannot date it precisely. Similar again. The word stalks the hallways. A retired judge writes an op-ed about patience and law that no one asked for, and everyone reads. It calms no one. The town oscillates between fatigue and fixation, between wanting it done and wanting it right. Another anonymous message arrives, shorter than before, almost petulant. You missed it. The detective reads it and feels a flash of anger he didn't expect. He doesn't respond. He forwards it and closes his laptop and goes for a walk, letting the night do what it does best, strip things down to sound and shadow. The defense files a motion to suppress the latest dig as prejudicial. The state responds with a memo about continuity and relevance. The judge schedules a hearing and notes, dryly, that relevance is doing a lot of work in this case. Laughter flickers and dies. On the stand, a county surveyor explains the land changes over time, how ravines deepen and fill, how markers vanish. He points to maps that don't line up and says that's normal. Normal is not comforting here. The sister attends a support group meeting and listens to strangers tell stories that sound different and feel the same. She learns that unanswered questions don't fade, they settle. She goes home and sleeps for 4 hours and dreams of open roads. The hearing on suppression is tense and technical. The judge allows the dig evidence in limited fashion, again, with guardrails that squeak under pressure. The case inches forward on its narrow bridge. As the season turns, cicadas give way to quieter nights. The town notices the change and takes it as a sign, even though signs have been unreliable narrators. The water level drops. The ravine dries enough to reveal more ground. Investigators return and find nothing new. Nothing new has become familiar. In chambers, the judge rereads the file and pauses on the word family, written in red ink long ago. He underlines it again, and then crosses it out and writes behavior instead. Words matter. He knows that better than anyone. The state prepares to consolidate its presentation, to argue that the pattern is now too tight to ignore. The defense prepares to argue that tightness is illusion, that humans are excellent at seeing shapes in clouds. Both sides are right in different ways. The anonymous emailer sends nothing more. The silence stretches and then becomes the background hum of the case, a reminder that control can be relinquished or lost. The detective hopes it's the former. As another hearing approaches, the town braces without admitting it, radios murmuring, calendars circled. The sister stands on her porch one evening and watches the light come on by itself, the timer doing what it was set to do. She thinks about expectations and returns and nights that don't cooperate. Inside the courthouse, files stack and thin and stack again. Outside, Texas breathes through cooling air. Roads gleam and then dull. Sound dies in places it always has. And the cold case keeps leaning forward, heavier now with fragments and routes and words like consistent and limited, daring the law to decide how much uncertainty it can hold without breaking, daring the night to finally give up something solid enough to stay. The calendar flips without ceremony, because time here has learned not to announce itself, and the case enters a phase that feels quieter, but isn't the kind of quiet where decisions harden. The judge schedules final arguments on scope and consequence, not verdicts, not endings, but what the court will allow itself to believe out loud. The language matters. Everyone knows it. The state sharpens its final presentation until it's almost austere, stripping away anything that might look like flourish. They talk about accumulation again, but differently now as gravity rather than weight, as something that doesn't need permission to pull. They talk about preparation as a habit, about familiarity as leverage, about how people who know land trust it to keep their secrets. They do not ask the court to fill gaps. They ask it to notice how few gaps remain unaccounted for. The defense responds by defending the gaps themselves, elevating them to principle. They talk about the empty center like it's sacred, about how law must protect absence from imagination, about how certainty is not earned by repetition. They remind the court that consistency is not identity, that routes are not acts, that fragments do not name themselves. They say the danger here is not letting a guilty person walk free, but teaching the law to accept atmosphere as proof. The judge listens with his chin in his hand and does not interrupt. He has learned when interruption clarifies and when it contaminates. He asks one question at the end, Just one about rehearsal and coincidence, about how often they wear the same face. The answers satisfy no one, and that somehow feels right. Outside, the town has learned to keep living alongside the case rather than under it. Football games happen. A new coffee shop opens where the diner used to be. The owner avoids the word opening in interviews and says starting instead. People nod like that matters. The detective revisits the industrial lot one last time and stands at the edge where sound drops away. He doesn't expect anything. Expectation has been burned out of him. He watches a truck idle and move on, watches dust settle into ruts that have held the same shapes for years. He writes a final memo that says no further investigative action recommended at this time and hates the way it sounds like surrender, even though it isn't. The sister cleans out a drawer and finds a receipt folded into quarters, meaningless, ordinary, and it hits her harder than any lab report. Ordinary things are cruel that way. She keeps it anyway. A reporter calls the retired deputy again and asks if he thinks the case will ever be solved. The deputy says solved is a word for puzzles, and this is a life. The quote runs under a photo of the road at dusk, and people argue about whether that's wisdom or evasion. The judge issues his order late on a Friday, the timing deliberate, a small kindness disguised as procedure. He allows the pattern to stand as pattern, the fragments as context, the routes as relevant, the behavior as probative. He disallows identity claims not anchored by science. He writes that the court recognizes the limits of certainty and the danger of pretending otherwise. He writes that the law must proceed anyway. The order lands and ripples outward, interpreted, misinterpreted, boiled down to headlines that miss the point by inches and miles. Cracked returns. Complicated returns. Cold case resurfaces in bold. The family reads the whole thing. The defense announces an intent to appeal the scope. The state announces readiness. The dance continues because that is what systems do when they reach their edge. No one pretends this is the end anymore. That night, rain comes in sheets and then stops, leaving the roads slick and reflective. The sister drives without destination and finds herself at the bend again, the one that bends twice, the one that swallows sound. She pulls over and sits with the engine off and listens. Nothing happens. That, too, is information. The anonymous emailer never writes again. Weeks pass. Months. The silence becomes ordinary, which is how control finally loses its grip. The detective checks the folder anyway, a habit he hasn't learned how to break. In the courthouse, clerks file and refile, stamping dates onto paper that looks the same as it always has. The judge moves on to other cases and carries this one with him anyway, a weight that doesn't show up in rulings but changes how he phrases them. A lab across the state publishes a paper on degraded material analysis that makes a few experts lift their heads and say maybe, not yet, but soon. The state takes note. The defense takes note. No one announces it. The town learns a new anniversary, not the disappearance, not the trial, but the order. People mark it quietly, the way you do with dates that don't belong to you anymore. On a late shift, a deputy stops at the shoulder near the field and kills the engine and listens, because some rituals survive evidence in law. The night breathes. Insects click. A truck passes and the sound dies where it always does. The deputy writes nothing down. The sister stands on her porch and watches the light turn on and off according to the timer's indifferent logic. She thinks about returns and how expectation is a contract the night doesn't sign. She says her sister's name out loud and lets it sit there without reply. The case settles into its next shape, neither frozen nor free, a cold case with a pulse, cracked enough to leak but not enough to drain. Appeals will come. Technology will advance. Memories will thin and then thicken around different edges. The land will keep what it knows. The law will keep asking. And somewhere between a road that bends and a place where sound dies, the story waits again, not for closure, not for relief, but for the one fact strong enough to stand alone, to stop being context and start being answer, to turn all this careful movement into something final. Until then, the night keeps its counsel, Texas keeps breathing, and the cold case stays exactly where it has always been, leaning forward unfinished, refusing to let anyone pretend otherwise. Years do not pass here so much as they layer, settling over the case like sediment, thin at first, then heavy enough to change the shape of the riverbed. Appeals are filed and answered and filed again, language circling itself with professional patience, and the case becomes something younger lawyers study and older ones lower their voices around. Nothing dramatic happens for a long time, which is its own kind of drama, because waiting sharpens attention and dulls mercy in equal measure. Technology inches forward without asking permission. A lab upgrades a machine. A database expands. A method once described as promising becomes routine. Somewhere, an analyst flags a note from years earlier and writes revisit in the margin, not because certainty has arrived, but because uncertainty has narrowed. The state and the defense both receive the same memo and say the same word out loud in different tones. Soon, the judge retires. On his last day, he cleans out his chambers and pauses over a thin folder he recognizes by feel alone. He doesn't take it with him. He leaves a handwritten note inside for whoever comes next, a sentence without advice, without instruction. Be careful with patterns. They can hold you, or they can hold you back. The new judge inherits the file and reads it at night, the way you read things that refuse to behave during daylight hours. He notices what everyone notices eventually, how the case taught itself to survive disappointment, how it adapted to scrutiny, how it learned to look like resolution from a distance and like absence up close. He schedules nothing. He waits. The detective transfers out of the unit and then back again, unable to shake the gravitational pull of unfinished work. He trains new officers using this case without naming it, teaching them how to respect silence without surrendering to it, how to chase leads without feeding ghosts. He still drives the route sometimes, still turns off the engine, still listens. Habit is a kind of loyalty. The sister builds a life that does not resolve the past but makes room around it. She stops correcting people who use the wrong tense. She learns that memory is not a museum, it's a weather system. Some days are clear. Some days bruise. She keeps the porch light on even after the timer breaks and replaces it with another one that does the same thing. Expectation is not the point anymore. Presence is. A new tip arrives the way they always do, small and almost apologetic, from someone who moved away and found an old notebook in a box they were finally brave enough to open. Inside, a sketch of a bend in a road and a note about sound dropping fast, written years ago, never shared because nothing came of it then. Investigators thank the sender and add it to the pile of echoes. The echo matters, even if it doesn't speak. A lab calls with an update that feels like a held breath finally released, a refinement, not a revelation. The fragments align a little closer. The probabilities shift a little tighter. Identity still refuses to sign its name. The word likely appears fewer times. The word consistent does more work than it used to. The state considers its options. The defense does too. The law remains what it is, a narrow bridge over a wide river. The anonymous emailer never returns. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, the silence has outlasted them. Control, once relinquished, does not come back quietly. It simply leaves. On an anniversary no one marks publicly anymore. The town gathers for something else entirely. A fundraiser, a game, a reason to stand together without carrying a story between them. The road is still there. The bend still bends twice. The place where sound dies still does its job. Life does not avoid the past, it learns to step around it. Late one night, a patrol unit pulls over near the field for no reason anyone could articulate afterward. The deputy kills the engine and listens because some habits are older than answers. The night breathes. Insects click. A truck passes far off, and the sound dissolves exactly where it always has. The deputy writes nothing down and drives on. In a quiet office, the case file is opened one more time, not for court, not for cameras, but because someone new wants to understand what patience looks like when it's earned. They read about gloves and tarps and rehearsals. They read about money and silence and a family secret that cracked and cut. They read about fragments that refused to become a body and routes that refused to become a confession. They read until the words lose their edges and then sharpen again. The truth, if it exists in a single piece, has not arrived yet. It may never. What has arrived is something else, heavier and harder to name, a collective understanding of how a night can stretch across decades, how certainty can be an act of violence when it's forced, how restraint can be a form of care. The case is not solved. It is not finished. It is not forgotten. Texas keeps breathing. Roads gleam and then dull. Water moves slowly even when it doesn't rain at all. Families keep secrets until they don't, and sometimes even after that. The law keeps asking the same questions in different voices. Technology keeps offering maybes that one day might become more. And somewhere between a road that bends and a place where sound dies, a life still waits to be fully accounted for. Not as a headline. Not as a theory. As a person who left a light on and expected to return. Until that accounting arrives, the cold case remains exactly what it has always been. A presence rather than a problem. Leaning forward in the dark, patient and unresolved, daring the night, daring the future, to finally answer back. The number doesn't matter anymore. Parts stopped meaning what they used to mean a long time ago. The story learned how to keep going without them. A heat wave settles over the county like a held breath, the kind that makes metal creak and tempers shorten. And somewhere in an air-conditioned lab, a technician reruns an old sample not because protocol demands it, but because habit does. Habit is what moves cold cases forward when hope has learned to be quiet. The machine hums, newer than the last one, smarter in ways no one explains to juries, and the data tightens by fractions that would have meant nothing 10 years ago and mean something now, not enough to shout, just enough to lean closer. The call goes out without fanfare. Another update. Another maybe. The sister listens and thanks the voice on the other end and hangs up and sits very still because movement feels like a decision and she is tired of deciding. Outside, the porch light clicks on, faithful as ever, and for a moment she hates it for its loyalty and then forgives it for the same reason. The defense files a brief that reads like muscle memory. The state answers with a memo that sounds like patience. Neither side says breakthrough. Everyone knows better than to say that word out loud. Breakthroughs are loud. This is pressure, slow and deliberate, the kind that changes things without announcing itself. A new name enters the file, not as a suspect, not as an answer, but as a footnote attached to an address that once belonged to someone who once belonged to the family orbit and then didn't. The address leads to a strip of land sold and resold, carved thinner each time, until it became no one's responsibility. Investigators walk it at dusk and notice how the ground slopes just enough to hide what you don't want seen, how sound folds into itself there. They mark it and move on, because moving on is how you keep from lying to yourself. The town barely notices. It has learned how to coexist with unfinished things. A mural goes up where the diner sign used to be, bright colors, no faces, just a road stretching into sky. People take pictures and argue about what it means, and then forget to argue and go home. In chambers, the judge rereads the old note left behind by his predecessor and understands it differently now. Be careful with patterns. He thinks about how patterns seduce, how they offer comfort in exchange for rigor. He schedules nothing. He waits for the thing that doesn't fit. A package arrives at the sheriff's office with no return address and no drama. Inside, a USB drive and a single sentence printed on cheap paper. I can't carry this anymore. The video on the drive is short and badly framed, shot years ago on a phone that didn't know how to see in the dark. It shows a place where sound dies and a hand pointing, shaking, toward a patch of ground that looks like every other patch of ground until it doesn't. The metadata is intact. The timestamp matters. The lab works fast this time, not because they're excited, but because they know what speed costs and what delay can steal. The ground yields something small and terrible and undeniable. Not everything. Enough. Enough to stop saying consistent. Enough to stop saying likely. The word identity finally clears its throat. Notifications are made in a room that has learned how to receive them. The sister closes her eyes and opens them and nods. She asks no questions. She doesn't need to. Outside, the porch light burns on into morning, and no one turns it off. The arrest, when it comes, is quiet. No chase. No resistance. Just a door opening and a man older than his photographs stepping into the heat and blinking like he forgot what daylight does. The charge is careful. The language is precise. The law does not celebrate. It proceeds. Courtrooms fill again, slower this time, heavier. The evidence speaks without raising its voice. The family secret, once explosive, now sounds small and mean and tired. The defense argues timing and contamination and memory. The state argues nothing it doesn't have to. The judge listens and asks fewer questions than ever. Fewer questions mean the answers have arrived. Outside, the town gathers without planning to. No signs. No chance. Just people standing where they are when the news reaches them. Phones buzzing, radios murmuring, the road doing what it's always done. Someone cries. Someone exhales. Someone keeps sweeping their porch like the day didn't change shape. The verdict lands on a weekday afternoon and sounds almost modest. Guilty. The word does its work and sits down. There is no cheer. There is no collapse. There is only the strange relief of something finally stopping. Years later, a young officer will ask an older one what it felt like when the cold case broke. The older one will think for a moment and say it didn't break. It wore down. Like stone. Like patience. The sister turns off the porch light one night without ceremony. She stands in the dark and lets it be dark and feels nothing dramatic happen, which is the point. In the morning, she wakes and makes coffee and carries a life forward that no longer has to lean. Texas keeps breathing. Roads gleam and dull. Water moves slowly, rain or no rain. And somewhere, in a place where sound used to die, the night finally gives up what it was holding. Not loudly, not cleanly, but enough to let the living stop listening for it. After the verdict, the town doesn't change the way movies say it should. There is no before and after split you can point to on a map. There is only a subtle loosening, like a knot that's been pulled tight for so long no one remembers when the tension started. People still drive the same roads. The bend still bends twice. Sound still dies where it always did. But it dies differently now, without expectation clinging to it. The sentencing comes months later, measured, procedural, spoken in a voice trained to keep emotion from becoming precedent. Years are counted. Credits are applied. Words like consecutive and eligibility do their quiet arithmetic. The man at the center of it all listens without expression, older than guilt, smaller than the secret he carried. And when it's over, he is led away through a door that closes with a sound no one describes as satisfying. Satisfying is not a word this case ever earned. Outside, reporters ask the family how it feels now that it's finally over. The sister says it's not over, it's just no longer loud. The quote runs once and then disappears, too subtle to survive the cycle. Evidence is archived again, this time with finality that feels provisional anyway. Boxes are sealed. Labels are printed. A chain of custody ends in a sentence that doesn't need a courtroom to understand it. Case status resolved. The word looks strange on paper, like a translation that doesn't quite land. The detective attends the retirement party he postponed twice and listens to speeches that praise persistence without naming its cost. Someone hands him a plaque. He thanks them and thinks about all the nights he turned off an engine and listened for something that never arrived. He keeps the plaque in a drawer. The judge writes one last order related to the case, administrative, almost clerical, and feels a weight lift he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Later, he will dream about narrow bridges and wide rivers and wake without remembering why. The land where the remains were found is fenced off and then, eventually, released back into the ordinary world. Grass grows. Tires leave tracks. No marker is placed because markers attract the wrong kind of attention. The earth does not need an audience. A memorial is held that isn't advertised. No speeches. No microphones. Just names spoken once, aloud, and then allowed to rest. The sister brings nothing with her and leaves nothing behind. Years pass more honestly now. Technology keeps moving. New cases arrive with new urgencies. The cold case becomes a lesson rather than a presence, cited in training rooms, summarized in journals, reduced to bullet points that never quite capture the sound of that night or the way waiting felt in the body. Sometimes someone new to town will ask about the road or the bend or the place where sound dies, and someone else will answer briefly and then change the subject. This is not secrecy. It's economy. On a summer evening much later, the sister drives past the field without slowing. The porch light at her house stays off. She notices and keeps going. Texas keeps breathing, because it always does. Roads gleam and dull. Water moves slowly whether anyone is watching or not. And the story, finally finished enough to be put down, doesn't ask for attention anymore. It exists as fact now, not tension, not rumor, not hope stretched thin. The night remains, but it no longer leans forward. Long after the files are sealed and the microphones packed away, the case continues in smaller, quieter places, the way deep weather does. It shows up in how people pause at intersections without knowing why, in how a story gets told once and then never again, in how a name can still change the temperature of a room even when no one reacts. Resolution doesn't erase habit. It just redirects it. The man convicted becomes a line in a registry, then a paragraph in an annual report, then a footnote in a training slide. His face fades faster than his actions. Inside the facility where he serves his time, days stack neatly, identical enough to dull memory. He does not give interviews. He does not confess beyond what the court required. Silence, for him, has always been the last form of control, and he keeps it until it keeps him instead. The detective finally stops driving the route. Not all at once. First he skips a week, then a month, then realizes one evening that he hasn't thought about the bend in days. The realization lands softly. He doesn't celebrate it. He lets it pass like a train you don't need to catch. The judge, now fully retired, reads a newspaper article about a different cold case cracked somewhere else and circles a sentence without meaning to. Patterns again. He smiles at the margin note and closes the paper. Some lessons don't expire. They just stop demanding attention. The town's younger generation grows up with the case as background noise, something adults mention carefully, something teachers reference when explaining why procedures matter. To them, it has edges and dates and an ending. They don't feel the weight of the waiting. That weight belongs to those who carried it, and those people are learning how to set it down without dropping it on anyone else. The land keeps doing what land does. Rain changes the ravine. Sun bleaches the grass. Tracks appear and vanish. If there is memory in soil, it does not perform. It absorbs and releases on its own schedule. Once a year, the sister allows herself to open the old box. Not to search it, just to acknowledge it. She touches the ordinary things and closes the lid again. This is not mourning anymore. It's maintenance. She is asked, occasionally, to speak at events about closure and justice. She declines most of them. Closure is a word that promises a door where there is really just a widening hallway. Justice, she has learned, is quieter than people expect and heavier than they admit. A journalist pitches a long-form piece about the case and is gently turned away. The editor understands. Some stories don't benefit from being retold. They benefit from being allowed to rest. At night, when the wind is right, sound still thins in that place where it always did. Physics doesn't adjust for meaning. But now, when sound dies there, it does so without dragging a question behind it. That is the difference. Small, profound. The final artifact of the case appears years later in an unexpected place. A revised protocol, a change in how evidence is preserved, a footnote that prevents another family from waiting as long. No one names it after the case. The work speaks without attribution. That feels appropriate. The sister turns on a light one evening, not because it's dark, but because she wants to read. She turns it off when she's done. The action means nothing and everything. Texas keeps breathing. It always will. Roads gleam and dull. Water moves slowly, patient as law, indifferent as time. And the story, no longer leaning, no longer pulling, settles into the vast category of things that happened and mattered and do not need to keep happening to prove it. There is no echo now, just space where an echo used to be.